The woman waiting at the border checkpoint had the stance of someone who had been standing there long before Phillip Kensington arrived and would still be standing there long after he left, immovable as stone, and he knew immediately that she had come specifically for him. "Phillip Kensington," the orc official behind the wooden desk said, not looking up from the sheaf of permits spread before him. "Cartographer, commissioned by the Joint Trade Council to map the northern routes through orc territory. 5 days estimated travel time to the far checkpoint at Redwater Crossing." "That's correct," Phillip said, adjusting the strap of his surveying case. "You'll need an escort." The official stamped something with more force than strictly necessary. "Regulations." "I understand." "I'll take the assignment." The woman by the door spoke for the first time, her voice carrying the particular clarity of someone who had already made up her mind and saw no reason to pretend otherwise. The official finally looked up, his expression shifting through several stages of surprise before settling on resignation. "Wren Fairwind, you're scheduled for Eastern Patrol rotation. Assign someone else to Eastern Patrol." Wren pushed off from the wall she had been leaning against and crossed to the desk in 3 long strides. "I know the northern routes better than anyone currently available. You said yourself that Garak is down with fever and Morna just came off a 2-week expedition." She was not what Phillip had expected, though he was not entirely sure what he had expected. She stood perhaps an inch shorter than his own 6 feet, her build athletic in a way that suggested speed and endurance rather than raw strength. Her green skin bore the faint pattern of old scars along her forearms, the kind that spoke of years spent moving through brush and bramble. Her tusks were small, barely protruding past her lower lip, and her dark hair was pulled back in a single braid that fell past her shoulders. She wore practical traveling clothes, leather reinforced at the knees and elbows, and carried herself with the easy confidence of someone who knew exactly how capable she was. "The northern routes," the official repeated slowly. "Every spring, every hidden ford, every place where the cliffs become unstable after rain." Wren ticked off points on her fingers. "The old trader's shelter at Half Moon Ridge, the safe crossing at Bent Creek versus the dangerous one at Devil's Rapids. The village where his maps will need updating because they moved the settlement 3 years ago after the flood." Phillip found himself leaning forward slightly. "There's a relocated village." Wren's eyes flicked to him for the first time, assessing. They were a striking amber color, sharp and intelligent. 2, actually. "Your permits are based on surveys from 7 years ago. The landscape has changed." "All the more reason," the official muttered, "to send someone who won't turn a 5-day journey into a festival tour." But he was already pulling out a different form, which told Phillip the argument was essentially over. 5 days, Wren said firmly. "Maybe 6 if we hit bad weather. I'll keep to the schedule." The official made a noise that suggested profound skepticism, but signed the form anyway. Route assignment. Wren Fairwind to escort the human cartographer Phillip Kensington from this checkpoint to Redwater Crossing via the northern approved paths. Expected duration, 5 days. Report any deviations. Wren took the signed paper and folded it precisely before tucking it into her belt. "We should leave within the hour. Daylight is better for the first stretch." Phillip nodded, still processing the speed with which this had all unfolded. He had expected bureaucracy, delays, perhaps an escort who viewed the assignment as a tedious obligation. Instead, he had a volunteer who had apparently materialized out of nowhere with an almost aggressive competence. "I'll need a few minutes to check my equipment," he said. "Meet me at the northern gate. There's a water cistern there. Fill everything you have. The first reliable spring is half a day's walk." Wren was already moving toward the door. "Wren," the official called after her. She paused. 5 days. 5 days, she repeated, and then she was gone. The official turned his attention back to Philip with an expression of weary patience. She's one of our best guides. You're in capable hands. That said, she has her own way of doing things. Her own way, she'll keep you safe. She'll get you where you need to go, but if she says to stop, you stop. If she says to go around, you go around. The land here doesn't forgive mistakes, and she knows it better than her own heartbeat. He gathered up Philip's permits and handed them over in a neat stack. And if the journey takes 6 days instead of 5, it's because it needed to take 6 days. Understood? Philip understood that he was being told something important beneath the surface of the words, but he was not entirely sure what. Understood, he said anyway. An hour later, he stood at the northern gate with his pack redistributed, his water skins full, and his surveying equipment carefully secured. Wren appeared from around the corner of the checkpoint building with her own pack, considerably smaller than his, and a walking staff of pale wood worn smooth with use. "You carry too much," she observed. "I need my instruments. Maps don't draw themselves. The instruments are fine." "I mean the rest." She nodded at his pack. "How many days of food do you have in there?" 7, in case of delays. "And how much does it weigh?" Philip shifted his shoulders under the straps. "It's manageable. Manageable for how long?" "We have a lot of ground to cover, and tired legs make for bad decisions." But she did not press the point, just turned toward the open gate and the landscape beyond. "We'll see how you feel at the end of today. Come on." The land beyond the checkpoint was not dramatically different from the borderlands Philip had traveled through to reach it. Rolling hills covered in mixed forest, occasional clearings where sunlight broke through in golden shafts, the distant sound of water running over stone. But there was a quality to the light, or perhaps to the silence, that felt different, deeper, as though he had crossed some invisible threshold into a place that operated by older rules. "The first thing you need to understand," Wren said as they walked, "is that orc lands are not empty wilderness waiting to be mapped. People live here. Communities, families, trade routes that have existed for generations. When you draw your lines, you're documenting something real, not claiming something new." "I understand that," Philip said a bit stiffly. "I'm not a conqueror, I'm a cartographer." "Good." She glanced back at him. "Then we'll get along fine." They walked in silence for a while, falling into the rhythm of the trail. Wren moved with an easy, ground-eating pace that was faster than it looked, and Philip found himself working to keep up without appearing to work. His pack, which had felt manageable in the courtyard, was beginning to make its weight known across his shoulders. "The maps you're working from," Wren said eventually. 7 years old, you said. "The base surveys, yes. My commission is to update them and fill in the gaps. There's talk of expanding the trade agreements, but both sides need accurate routes first. And you're doing this alone." There was something in her tone that made Philip hesitate. "I've done solo survey work before. It's often more efficient than coordinating a team." "Efficient," Wren repeated as though tasting the word. "Is that what you call it? What would you call it?" She was quiet for several steps. "Safer, maybe, for you. No one else to worry about, no one else to—" She stopped, both the sentence and her walking, and held up a hand. Philip froze. The forest around them looked no different than it had a moment before, but Wren's entire body had shifted into a different quality of stillness. Her head tilted slightly as she listened to something he could not hear. "What is it?" he whispered. "Elk. Big herd, moving through the valley to our east. We'll wait a moment." They cross the trail about 100 yards ahead, and they're skittish this time of year. If we spook them, they'll tear up the path and make the next mile significantly harder. Philip listened and heard nothing but the usual forest sounds: wind and leaves, a distant bird call. How do you know they're there? The birds stopped singing ahead of us, and if you listen very carefully, you can hear them moving. She stood utterly motionless, her eyes fixed on the trail ahead. Give it another minute. Philip tried to hear what she was hearing and failed, but he trusted the certainty in her voice, so he waited, his pack cutting into his shoulders, his legs grateful for the rest he would not have taken on his own. After what felt like considerably longer than a minute, Wren relaxed. There. They've crossed. We can go. Sure enough, when they reached the spot she had indicated, the trail was churned with fresh tracks, dozens of cloven prints pressed deep into the soft earth. Philip stopped to examine them, automatically estimating the size of the herd, the direction of travel. 70, maybe 80 animals, Wren said, watching him. Moving northwest toward the summer grazing lands, they'll stay in the high country until the first snow. You can tell all that from the tracks. I can tell all that from living here. She started walking again. The tracks just confirm it. By the time the sun reached its zenith, Philip's shoulders were burning and his legs were trembling with the effort of maintaining Wren's pace. She had not slowed, had not suggested a rest, had simply kept moving with that same steady, relentless rhythm. He was beginning to understand what the official had meant about her having her own way of doing things. There's a clearing ahead, Wren said, as though she had not noticed his discomfort at all. Good place to stop for midday meal. Spring water, shade, flat ground. The clearing, when they reached it, was exactly as advertised, a roughly circular break in the trees where sunlight pooled like liquid gold. A small spring bubbling up from between mossy rocks, and enough flat space to sit comfortably. Philip shrugged out of his pack with a relief so profound it was almost embarrassing. Wren set down her own pack, barely larger than his surveying case, and stretched with unself-conscious ease. How are the shoulders? Fine, Philip lied. She looked at him with those sharp amber eyes and said nothing, which was somehow worse than disagreement. She knelt by the spring and filled a small cup, drank, refilled it and offered it to him. The water was shockingly cold and tasted of stone and growing things. Thank you, he said. While we eat, you can tell me what you actually need to map. Wren pulled out a small parcel of food from her pack: bread, cheese, dried fruit. The official route is marked well enough, but you're here for more than just confirming what's already known, yes? Philip settled onto a flat rock and dug out his own supplies, suddenly aware of how much he was carrying compared to her economical provisions. The Joint Trade Council wants detailed surveys of potential alternate routes, seasonal variations, resource availability, safe camping sites. Places where a trader might shelter in bad weather or resupply. The goal is to create comprehensive maps that work year-round, not just fair weather guides. That's a lot of detail for 5 days. Wren bit into an apple, the sound crisp in the quiet clearing. It is, Philip admitted. I'll get what I can on this pass and note areas that need follow-up surveys. Or, Wren said slowly, you could be thorough the first time. I am thorough. I mean, you could take the time to do it right, rather than rushing through to meet an arbitrary deadline. She held up a hand before he could protest. I know, 5 days is what the permits say, but permits can be amended. Weather delays, unexpected obstacles, route deviations for safety, all acceptable reasons for extended travel time. Philip studied her across the clearing. You volunteered for this assignment very quickly. I did. And now you're suggesting we might need more than the allotted 5 days. I'm suggesting that good maps are worth doing well. Wren met his gaze without flinching. And that I know places that aren't on your 7-year-old surveys. Places that would be useful for traders to know about, but seeing them would add time to the journey. What kind of places? A sheltered valley with a reliable spring and good grazing, half a day off the main route. An old trade shelter that's been maintained by the local village. It's not marked on any human maps, but we allow its use. A ford across the Whitewater River that's safer than the bridge during spring floods, when the bridge gets unstable. She ticked them off as casually as if she were listing ingredients for a stew. Useful information, if you want your maps to actually help people instead of just recording lines on paper. Philip felt something shift in his chest, a familiar weight that he had learned to carry so carefully that he barely noticed it anymore until something pressed against it. Good maps. Useful information. Help people. The last survey I led, he heard himself say, I was in a hurry. We had a schedule and I cut corners to keep it. Took a route I thought would save us 2 days. He stopped, the words sticking in his throat. Wren waited, her expression patient. The route I chose went through an area I had marked as stable. It wasn't. There was a rock slide. 3 people died because I was too confident in my own judgment and too focused on the schedule. He looked down at the bread in his hands, no longer hungry. I don't cut corners anymore, but I also don't trust my own decisions the way I used to. I follow the established routes. I stick to the plan. I don't take risks. The clearing was very quiet. A breeze moved through the trees carrying the scent of pine and sun-warmed stone. I'm sorry, Wren said finally. That's a hard thing to carry. It's a necessary thing to carry. It keeps me careful. Careful is good. But there's a difference between being careful and being paralyzed. She finished her apple and tucked the core back into her pack. She would, Philip realized, carry it out rather than leave it. Even here in her own land, she left no trace. The places I'm talking about aren't risks. They're the opposite. They're safer, more reliable than the official routes in many cases, but they require trusting someone else's judgment. Mine. Can you do that? Philip looked at her, at the quiet confidence in her posture, the scars on her forearms that spoke of years of experience, the way she had known about the elk before he could hear them, the way she had chosen this perfect spot to rest. Yes, he said. I think I can. Wren smiled, a small expression that softened her whole face. Good. Then eat your lunch, cartographer. We have a spring to visit this afternoon, and it's going to add an extra half-day to the route. They reached the spring as the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, and Philip understood immediately why Wren had wanted him to see it. It emerged from the base of a cliff in a steady, generous flow, filling a series of natural stone basins before spilling down the hillside in a small waterfall. The area around it was clear and flat, protected from wind by the cliff face, with evidence of regular use fire-blackened stones arranged in a careful circle, stacks of dry wood under a rocky overhang. Traders use this, Philip asked, already pulling out his surveying instruments. Traders, hunters, travelers, anyone who knows about it. The spring never freezes, even in deep winter, and the flow never slows, even in drought. It's one of the most reliable water sources in this region. Wren filled her water skins with practiced efficiency. But it's not on your maps because it's just far enough off the main route that the original surveyors missed it. Philip set up his transit and began taking measurements, calculating distances and elevations, recording everything in his field notebook. Wren watched him work for a while, then began gathering wood to add to the stacks under the overhang. We'll camp here tonight, she said. There's no better spot within 3 hours' walk, and traveling in the dark is foolish when you don't have to. That puts us behind schedule. That puts us at a safe camp with good water and shelter. The schedule will adapt. She paused in her wood gathering. Unless you're concerned about the permits, Philip thought about the permits and the schedule and the careful plans he had made. Then he thought about the spring that would not be on the maps if Wren had not brought him here, and about traders who might camp in less safe places because they did not know this existed. "The permits will adapt too," he said, and returned to his surveying. They made camp as the evening light turned golden, and Wren proved as efficient at that as she was at everything else. Within half an hour they had a small fire burning, their bedrolls arranged on the flattest ground, and food warming on flat stones at the fire's edge. "Tell me about the villages that relocated," Phillip said as they ate. "You mentioned two." Wren nodded, swallowing a bite of the flatbread she had toasted over the fire. "Green Hollow and Riverside." Green Hollow was in a valley that flooded badly 3 years ago. The river changed course during a storm season, and what had been a seasonal high water problem became a permanent one. The whole community moved to higher ground about 2 miles east. Better location anyway, closer to the main road. And Riverside grew too large for the original site. They expanded onto the far side of the river, built a new bridge, and now the old village is basically just storage buildings and workshops. The actual homes and community center are all across the water. She poked at the fire with a stick, sending up a small shower of sparks. "Your maps show both villages in their old locations. Anyone using them for navigation would be significantly confused." Phillip made notes in his field book by the firelight. "We'll need to visit both." "That's another 2 days at least, maybe 3, depending on how detailed you want to be." "As detailed as necessary to be accurate." He looked up from his notes. "You're deliberately taking me to all the places that will extend this journey." "I'm taking you to all the places that will make your maps actually useful. If that extends the journey, so be it." Wren's tone was matter of fact, but there was something else beneath it, something Phillip could not quite identify. "Why?" he asked. "Why what? Why volunteer for this assignment? Why care so much about the maps being thorough? You could have let someone else take the job, spent 5 boring days walking the official route and been done with it." Wren was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When she spoke, her voice was softer than he had heard it before. "Because maps matter. Because traders who know where the safe water is and where the good shelter is and where the villages actually are, those traders survive. They come back. They tell others. And maybe, over time, the fear lessens a little bit. Maybe humans start to see Orc lands as places where people live, where communities exist, where help is available if you know where to look." She glanced at him. "And maybe I wanted to make sure that the person making those maps understood that, really understood it." "You could have just told the official that, asked for someone who would listen." "I could have. But I didn't know if you would listen. I still didn't know until you told me about your survey team." She pulled her knees up, wrapping her arms around them in a gesture that made her look suddenly younger. "You understand that landscapes have consequences, that mistakes cost lives. That's not something I can teach someone in 5 days if they don't already know it. But working with someone who does know it, that's worth volunteering for." Phillip felt that weight in his chest again, the one that pressed against the old wound. But for the first time in a long time, the pressure felt less like pain and more like recognition. "I'm glad you volunteered," he said quietly. Wren smiled at the fire. "Ask me again when you've walked another week in my company." They fell into a rhythm over the next several days, a pattern of walking and mapping and conversation that felt both new and oddly timeless. Wren would point out features of the landscape, a particular bent tree that marked a trail junction, a rock formation that was visible from miles away and served as a landmark, a stretch of ground that looked solid but turned to mud in rain. Phillip would measure and record and sketch, his notebooks filling with the kind of detail he had not allowed himself to pursue in years. On the 3rd day, they reached Green Hollow in its new location. The village was small, perhaps 20 buildings arranged around a central commons, but it hummed with life. Children played in the dusty street, their laughter rising over the sound of hammers and voices. A woman working in a garden straightened as they approached, her green skin darker than Wren's, her tusks more prominent. "Wren Fairwind," the woman called out, a grin splitting her face. "I heard you were off on Eastern patrol." "Change of plans," Wren called back. "I'm escorting a cartographer." "Official business." The woman's eyes slid to Philip with undisguised curiosity. "A human cartographer." The Joint Trade Council commissioned updated maps. "This is Phillip Kensington." "Philip, this is Kara Stonefist, Greenhallow's leader." Philip offered a small bow, unsure of the proper protocol. "It's an honor. I understand your village relocated after flooding." Kara's expression shifted from curiosity to something more guarded but not hostile. 3 years ago. The river had other ideas about where it wanted to go, and we decided not to argue with it. "Would you be willing to show me where the old village was, and tell me about the new location? It's important that the maps reflect current reality. Maps that show we're here, not where we were." Kara seemed to consider this. "That would be useful. We had a human trader come through last spring, spent half a day looking for us in the old valley before someone found him and brought him up here. He was not pleased. I imagine not." Kara wiped her hands on her trousers and stepped out of the garden. "All right, cartographer, I'll show you what you need to see. Wren, there's stew in the common hall if you're hungry." "I'll help Philip with the surveying," Wren said easily. "We can eat later." Kara led them through the village, pointing out the well, the common hall, the workshops, the small temple at the eastern edge. Philip measured and sketched and asked questions, and Kara answered them with increasing warmth. Other villagers drifted over, curious about the human with the strange instruments, and Wren made introductions with comfortable familiarity. "You know everyone," Philip observed as they finally settled in the common hall with bowls of stew and thick slices of bread. "I grew up not far from here." Different village, but close enough that everyone knows everyone else's business. Wren tore her bread in half and used it to sop up the rich broth. "Greenhallow and my home village used to trade back and forth constantly. I probably played with half the children here when we were all young." "Where is your home village?" 3 days south. "Little place called Windridge. My mother still lives there." Philip absorbed this, fitting another piece into his slowly forming understanding of who Wren was. "Do you get back often?" "Not as often as I should. The work keeps me moving." She glanced at him. "What about you? Do you have family waiting for you at the far checkpoint?" "No family. My parents died when I was young. I was raised by my uncle, who was also a cartographer. He's the one who taught me the trade." Philip stared into his stew. "He died 2 years ago." Heart gave out while he was working on a survey in the eastern mountains. "I'm sorry." He loved the work. If he had to go, I think he would have chosen to go that way out in the field, measuring the world. Philip smiled slightly. "He would have liked you." He always said the best guides were the ones who understood that the land was smarter than any of us. He sounds like a wise man. He was. They finished their meal in comfortable silence, and when they left Greenhallow the next morning, Kara stood at the edge of the village to wave them off. "Your maps better be accurate, cartographer," she called out. "We'll be checking." "They will be," Philip called back and meant it. The 4th day brought them to the ford Wren had mentioned, and Philip saw immediately why it was valuable. The official route crossed the Whitewater River over a narrow bridge of stone and timber that looked sturdy enough but sat low to the water in spring flood. It would be impassable or dangerous. The ford was located half a mile upstream, where the river widened and shallowed over a bed of smooth stones. The water was still fast, still cold, but the crossing looked manageable even in high water. "Traders don't know about this?" Philip asked, setting up his instruments on the bank. "Some do. The ones who have been coming through for years, who have built relationships with local guides. But it's not written down anywhere, not marked or signposted. If you're a newcomer, you use the bridge and hope for the best. Wren waded into the river, testing the current. In spring, that means waiting sometimes for a week for the water to drop enough to make the bridge safe. This ford you could cross any day of the year. That's a significant advantage for trade. It is. She splashed back to shore, her boots squelching. So put it on your maps. Let people know it's here. Phillip worked through the afternoon, measuring approaches and depths, recording landmarks that would help travelers find the ford, sketching sightlines. Wren ranged up and down the riverbank, pointing out features he should note: the way the water flowed around certain rocks, the deep pool on the far side that could trap an unwary wader, the gentle slope of the bank that made it easy for horses and carts. As the sun sank lower, Wren called out, "There's a question I have been wanting to ask you." Phillip looked up from his notebook. "Ask." "The survey that went wrong, you said you don't trust your own judgment anymore. But you've been making decisions this whole trip: where to set up your instruments, what to measure, how to record things. You trust those judgments. That's different. That's technical work, not navigation decisions." "Is it?" Wren came to sit beside him on the grassy bank. "You decided that the spring was worth the extra time to survey. You decided that Green Hello needed detailed measurements. You decided that this ford was important enough to spend a whole afternoon documenting. Those are judgment calls, Phillip. You've been making them constantly." He opened his mouth to argue and found he could not. She was right. He had been deciding, choosing, prioritizing all the things he told himself he no longer trusted himself to do. "It's easier when someone else confirms it," he said finally. "When you say something is important, I can believe it. But you're the one who decides how to document it, where to take measurements, what details matter. I can't do that part. I don't have your training." She pulled up a handful of grass and let it fall through her fingers. "Maybe the problem isn't that your judgment is bad. Maybe the problem is that you were working alone, with no one to check you, no one to offer a different perspective. That's not a judgment problem. That's an isolation problem." Phillip sat with that thought, turning it over in his mind like a river stone. An isolation problem. He had been so focused on not trusting himself that he had not considered the possibility that the issue was not his judgment but his lack of collaboration. "The surveyors who worked with my uncle," he said slowly, "they always worked in pairs at minimum. Uncle used to say that 2 sets of eyes caught twice as many mistakes, and 2 people thinking through a problem found solutions 1 person would miss." "Smart man," Wren said again. "After he died, I kept working alone. Partly because I was used to it. He was getting older, slowing down, and I had been doing more and more of the solo reconnaissance work. And partly because, after the rockslide, I didn't want anyone else's safety depending on my decisions. So you protected everyone else by isolating yourself. And convinced yourself it was because you were unreliable." Phillip looked at her, at the way the evening light caught in her dark hair, the thoughtful cast of her expression. "You're very direct. I am Orc. We tend not to see the point in talking around things." She smiled slightly. "Is it helping or making things worse?" "Helping," he admitted. "I think it's uncomfortable but in a useful way." "Good." Wren stood and offered him a hand up. "Come on. There's a good camping spot another mile upriver, and we should get there before full dark." The camping spot was another of Wren's hidden treasures, a flat shelf of rock above the river, protected by an overhang, with a natural fire pit already set up and stocked with dry wood. They made camp efficiently, the routine now familiar, and ate watching the river flow past in the gathering darkness. "How far behind schedule are we?" Phillip asked. "Depends on what schedule you mean. The official permits said 5 days. We're on day 4, and we're not even halfway to Redwater Crossing. Wren sounded utterly unconcerned. But in terms of the actual work schedule, the time needed to do thorough, accurate surveying, we're right on track. The officials at the far checkpoint are going to have questions. Let them question. We have documentation of everything: weather observations, route deviations, survey requirements. And when you submit maps that are 10 times more useful than anything that's come before, no one is going to care that it took 3 weeks instead of 5 days. 3 weeks. Phillip set down his cup. You think this will take 3 weeks? Wren's expression turned carefully neutral. I think it will take as long as it takes. There's still Riverside to visit, and the sheltered valley I mentioned, and the old trade shelter. Plus several spots where the terrain has changed enough to need new measurements. And we should probably visit at least 1 more village, maybe 2, to verify populations and resources. She ticked items off on her fingers. Add it all up, and yes, somewhere around 3 weeks seems reasonable. The permits can be extended. Will be extended once we send word that we need more time for comprehensive surveying. Wren met his eyes. Unless you want to rush through, do a surface job, and leave knowing that your maps are incomplete. Is that what you want? No, Phillip said immediately. No, that's exactly what I don't want. Then we take the time we need. She settled back against her bedroll. Stop worrying about the schedule and start thinking about the work. That's what matters. Phillip lay awake long after Wren's breathing had evened into sleep, staring up at the stars visible beyond the overhang. 3 weeks. 3 weeks in Wren's company, walking through Orc lands, seeing the places she wanted to show him, learning the way she read the landscape. 3 weeks of conversations by firelight and her steady presence beside him on the trail. He realized, with a start that sent his heart racing, that he wanted those 3 weeks. Wanted them not just for the maps, though the maps mattered, but because somewhere in the past 4 days, Wren Fairwind had become the most interesting person he had met in years. Because her directness challenged him, and her competence awed him, and her small smiles made something warm bloom in his chest. Because when she looked at him with those sharp amber eyes, he felt seen in a way he had not felt since before the rockslide, since before he had learned to make himself small and careful and alone. This was dangerous territory, more dangerous than any cliff or river. He was here for work. She was here as his escort, fulfilling a duty. And even if she somehow felt a fraction of what he was beginning to feel, what future could there be? He would finish his maps and return to human lands. She would return to her work as a guide. Their paths would diverge at Redwater Crossing, and that would be the end, unless, the thought crept in quietly, insidiously, unless he found reasons to return, unless the maps needed follow-up surveys, seasonal variations documented, updates recorded, unless he requested her specifically as a guide for future work, unless 3 weeks became the beginning rather than the entirety. Phillip turned on his side, facing the dying fire, and tried to quiet his racing thoughts. He was getting ahead of himself. Wren had given no indication that she saw him as anything other than a responsibility, a human cartographer who needed guidance through Orc lands. The fact that she was extending the journey just meant she cared about the quality of the maps, not that she cared about him. He told himself this firmly and tried to believe it, and eventually, fitfully, sleep found him. The 5th day began with rain, a steady drizzle that turned the world gray and soft. Wren checked the sky with a practiced eye and announced they would wait a few hours before moving. The trail we need gets slippery in rain, she explained, settling under the overhang with her back against stone. Better to let it ease off a bit before we attempt it. Phillip, who had been prepared to walk in any weather, found he did not mind the delay. He spent the time reviewing his notes, making small sketches of the routes they had covered, and trying not to be too obvious about watching Wren as she maintained her gear with methodical care. "Tell me about being a guide," he said eventually. "How did you start?" Wren looked up from the knife she was sharpening. "I started by getting lost." "Lost?" "I was 12. Thought I knew the woods around our village well enough to go exploring on my own. Got turned around in a fog and spent 2 days wandering in circles before a hunter found me." She went back to sharpening, the stone making soft, rhythmic sounds against the blade. "I was furious with myself, humiliated, so I decided I would never be lost again. Started paying attention to everything: landmarks, water flow, animal tracks, plant patterns. Spent years learning to read the land. By the time I was 16, I was guiding hunting parties. By 18, I was leading trade caravans. And now you're assigned to the border checkpoints. I go where I'm needed." Border work is important, helping humans navigate orc land safely, making sure everyone understands the rules and expectations. She tested the knife's edge with her thumb, nodded in satisfaction. "But I admit, most of the time it's boring. 5-day escort jobs with traders who just want to get through as fast as possible, who aren't interested in the land or the people. This," she gestured at the rain, the landscape beyond him, "this is better." "This is what?" "This is someone who wants to understand. Who asks questions and listens to answers. Who sees value in the hidden spring and the relocated village." Wren slid the knife back into its sheath. "This is the kind of work that matters." Phillip felt warmth spread through his chest. "I'm glad I could provide a more interesting assignment." "You're doing more than that." Wren met his eyes. "You're making me remember why I became a guide in the first place. Somewhere along the way, I forgot that it wasn't just about getting people safely from one checkpoint to another. It was about teaching them to see the land the way I see it. Sharing what I know so that the next time they come through, they come with understanding instead of fear." The rain eased to a mist, and they packed up and moved on, but her words stayed with Phillip, playing over and over in his mind. "Teaching them to see the land the way I see it." It was exactly what she was doing, he realized. Every spring she showed him, every ford and village and landmark, she was teaching him not just to map the territory, but to understand it. To see it as a living, breathing place filled with people and communities, and carefully maintained knowledge. They reached Riverside 2 days later, and it was exactly as Wren had described. The old village on the west bank of the river was now mostly workshops and storage, while the real community sprawled across the east bank, connected by a graceful timber bridge. Phillip spent a full day surveying both sides, talking to residents, documenting the new layout. The village leader, an older orc man named Thorn Winddriver, was so pleased at the prospect of accurate maps that he insisted they stay for dinner. "You cannot imagine," Thorn said, ladling stew into deep bowls, "the confusion when traders arrive looking for houses and families where there are now only grain silos and blacksmith forges. We have had to post signs, and still people wander around befuddled." "The new maps will show both sides clearly," Phillip assured him, "and I'll make notes about the bridge, its location, its capacity, its condition." "The bridge is good for another 20 years at least," Thorn said proudly. "We built it to last. And we maintain it properly, not like some villages I could name." That night, sleeping in the guest room of the village common hall, Phillip calculated their progress. They were 8 days in, and by his estimate, still had at least another week of surveying ahead before they would even approach Redwater Crossing, which meant Wren's 3-week prediction was looking increasingly accurate. He waited to feel anxious about the extended timeline and found instead a quiet sort of contentment. 3 weeks. 3 weeks of this work, this landscape, this companionship. It did not feel like nearly enough. The realization that he had fallen in love with Wren Fairwind came to him on the 10th day, in the sheltered valley she had promised him. The valley was everything she had said it would be: a hidden gem nestled between hills, with a spring-fed stream running through it, lush grass perfect for grazing, and natural shelter from wind in the form of rocky outcrops and thick stands of trees. It was the kind of place that could save a trader's life in a storm, or provide crucial rest for exhausted animals, or serve as an emergency campsite in desperate circumstances. "How is this not on any maps?" Phillip asked, his surveying instrument spread around him. "Because no surveyor ever asked an orc guide where the best shelters were," Wren said simply. She was sitting on a sun-warmed boulder, her face tilted up to catch the light, utterly relaxed. They just walked the official routes, marked what they could see from the path, and moved on. "This valley is only visible if you know to look for it. There's a trail, but it's subtle." Phillip made his measurements and recordings, but part of his attention was always on Wren, the way she moved through the landscape with such ease. The way she knew exactly where to step, where to look, what to listen for. The way she had shared all of this with him, not because she had to, but because she wanted the maps to be right, because she wanted him to understand. He loved her efficiency and her competence. He loved her directness and her dry humor. He loved the way she looked when she smiled, and the way she listened when he talked about his work, and the way she had somehow managed to make him trust his own judgment again by the simple expedient of trusting it herself. And the thought of reaching Redwater Crossing, of their paths diverging, of returning to his life without her steady presence beside him, it made something in his chest ache with an intensity that stole his breath. "Phillip." Wren had turned to look at him, her expression concerned. "Are you all right?" "Yes," he managed. "Just thinking. About the maps, about what happens when they're finished." The words came out before he could stop them. Wren's expression shifted, became carefully neutral in the way he was beginning to recognize meant she was hiding something. "You'll submit them to the Joint Trade Council. They'll be copied and distributed. Traders will use them. Lives will be saved. Trade will improve. Everyone benefits. And you'll go back to your border checkpoint assignments." "I suppose I will." 5-day escort jobs with traders who are not interested in the land or the people. Most likely. She looked away, out across the valley. "Unless something changes." Phillip's heart hammered. "What would you want to change?" For a long moment Wren did not answer. Then she slid down from her boulder and crossed to where he stood among his instruments. "I should not have taken 3 weeks for this job," she said quietly. 5 days, maybe 6 with comprehensive surveying, but I kept finding reasons to extend it. Another village to visit, another route to explore, another feature that needed documenting. I told myself it was for the quality of the maps, and that is true, but it was not the only truth. "What's the other truth?" Phillip's voice came out rough. "The other truth is that I did not want it to end. These days with you, teaching you the land, watching you work, talking by the fire, they have been the best days I have had in years. And the thought of walking away from that at Redwater Crossing, of saying goodbye and going back to my regular assignments, of never seeing you again." She shook her head. "I have been selfish. I have extended your journey for my own sake, and I should apologize for that." "Don't," Phillip said. "Don't apologize, because I was hoping you were doing exactly that. I was hoping that maybe, just maybe, you wanted more time as much as I did." Wren's eyes met his, wide and startled. "You did?" "I have been trying to figure out how to ask for a follow-up survey. How to request you specifically as a guide. How to manufacture a reason to come back." He laughed, shaky and relieved. "I have been terrible at it, just worrying in circles, because I didn't know if you felt anything or if I was reading things that weren't there." You weren't reading things that weren't there. Wren's voice was barely a whisper. I feel Philip, I feel everything. I have been trying so hard not to let it show because you're here for work and I'm here as your escort, and I thought if I just kept it professional then maybe it would not hurt so much when you left. What if I didn't leave? The words tumbled out. What if I came back? What if this was the first survey, not the only one? You would do that, keep coming back to Orc lands. I would do it for the maps, and I would do it to see you. He reached out slowly, carefully, and took her hand. Her skin was warm, her fingers strong. Wren, these 10 days with you have been, I didn't think I could feel this way again. Feel hopeful, feel capable, feel connected to someone. You gave me back something I thought I lost in that rock slide, and I don't want to lose it again. I don't want to lose you. Wren's hand tightened on his. You keep saying 3 years like that was forever ago. You carried that weight for so long all by yourself. I didn't know how to put it down. Maybe you needed someone to help carry it. She stepped closer, and he could see the pulse beating at her throat, the way her breath came quick. Maybe we both needed someone. Is that what you want? Philip asked. Someone, or specifically, she kissed him, cutting off the question. It was careful and tentative at first, a question in itself, and when he kissed her back it was with all the feeling that had been building for days. Relief and joy and desire and the bone-deep certainty that this was right. This was what had been missing when they finally broke apart. Wren was smiling, genuinely smiling, and it transformed her face into something radiant. I want you, she said clearly. Specifically you. Not as a cartographer or a responsibility or an assignment, just you. I want you too, Philip said. Every stubborn, competent, beautiful part of you. They stayed in the valley for another full day, ostensibly because it needed thorough documentation, but really because neither of them wanted to leave. They mapped and measured, but they also talked, sharing stories and hopes and the awkward, wonderful process of learning how to be together rather than just working together. Wren told him about growing up in Windridge, about her mother who was a weaver and her father who had died in a hunting accident when she was young, about learning the land as a way to feel close to him, because he had loved the wilderness and known every trail and stream. Philip told her about his uncle, about the years of training and the slow realization that cartography was not just a trade but a calling, about the way maps could change lives, could open up possibilities, could turn fear of the unknown into understanding. My uncle used to say, Philip said as they sat by the fire that night, that the best maps were made by people who loved the land they were mapping, not in a possessive way, but in a way that wanted to share its gifts and protect its vulnerable places. He would have been pleased with the work you are doing here, Wren said. I hope so. I think he would have liked knowing I was finally listening to his advice about working with a partner. Philip laced his fingers through hers. Even if this particular partnership is not quite what he had in mind. No, he probably imagined another cartographer, not an orc guide who keeps adding detours to my schedule. Wren laughed. Those detours are making your maps brilliant and you know it. I do know it. And I know that I'm going to need to come back at least twice more to document seasonal variations. Once in deep summer, once in winter. Conveniently, I am available for long-term escort assignments. Wren's tone was light, but her eyes were serious. If the Joint Trade Council approves extended surveying work, I'll make sure they approve it. These maps are too important to rush. Philip kissed her temple. And I have a very compelling guide who has demonstrated the value of thoroughness. They traveled on, but the journey had shifted from a route to be completed into something precious, each day a gift. They visited 2 more villages, surveyed 3 additional springs, and documented a series of landmarks that would make navigation significantly easier for traders. Philip's notebooks filled, His maps grew dense with detail, and all the while Wren was beside him, teaching and guiding and making everything better just by being there. On the 15th day, they encountered their first real navigational challenge, a section of trail that had been washed out by recent storms, leaving a gap too wide to cross safely. "The official route goes this way," Wren said, examining the washout. "But it's going to take at least 2 days to find a safe way around, maybe more if the damage extends further than we can see." Phillip studied the terrain, the maps, the landscape around them. The old fear tried to rise, the memory of confident decisions that had gone wrong, of shortcuts that had killed. But Wren was there, her presence steady and sure. "What do you think?" he asked. "You know this land better than anyone." Wren walked the edge of the washout, testing ground, reading the flow patterns of the water that had caused the damage. "There's an old game trail that runs parallel to this, maybe half a mile east. It's rougher, but it should be intact. We could try that." "Should be." "I have not walked it in over a year. Conditions change." She came back to stand beside him. "But my instinct says it's our best option. Safer than trying to ford the debris here, faster than backtracking to find another route." Phillip looked at the washout, then at Wren, then back at the maps in his hands. Trust someone else's judgment. Work as a team, not alone. He took a breath and made the decision. "Your instinct has been right about everything else. We'll try the game trail." The game trail was rough, exactly as Wren had warned, a narrow thread of packed earth winding through dense forest. But it was intact and passable, and by evening they had bypassed the washout entirely and rejoined the main route on the far side. "Good call," Phillip said as they made camp. "We made it together," Wren corrected. "You trusted my judgment, I trusted your ability to handle rough terrain. That's how it works." "Is it always this easy?" "Easy?" Wren raised an eyebrow. "We just spent 8 hours climbing over roots and ducking under branches." "My legs are going to be screaming tomorrow." "I mean working together, deciding together." Phillip struggled to articulate what he meant. "When I worked alone, every decision felt enormous, weighted with all the possible ways it could go wrong. But with you, it feels manageable. Like we can handle whatever comes up. That's what partnership is supposed to feel like." Wren settled beside him, resting her head against his shoulder. "You watch for things I might miss. I watch for things you might miss. We check each other. We compensate for each other's blind spots. And when something goes wrong, we fix it together instead of carrying the blame alone." "I like it," Phillip said quietly. "I like who I am when I'm with you. Good, because you're stuck with me now. I'm not letting you wander off to do solo surveys anymore. Promise. Promise." They reached Redwater Crossing on the 18th day. 3 days shy of Wren's predicted 3 weeks, but a full 13 days past the original 5-day schedule. The checkpoint guards took one look at them, travel worn and sun-browned and clearly comfortable in each other's company, and drew their own conclusions. "Rough journey?" one of the guards asked, his tone suggesting he thought the journey had been anything but rough. "Comprehensive," Wren said calmly, handing over their permits and the sheaf of documentation she had maintained. "Weather delays, route deviations for surveying purposes, and multiple village consultations. All recorded." The guard flipped through the documentation, his eyebrows rising. "This is extremely thorough." "That was the point," Phillip said. "The maps needed to be right, and that required time. I'm sure it did." The guards stamped their permits with a finality that suggested the bureaucratic portion of the journey was over. "Welcome to Redwater Crossing. You'll find the Trade Council representative in the building to the left if you need to file your survey results." They found the representative, a weary-looking man named Marcus Stone, who brightened considerably when Phillip showed him the preliminary maps and notebooks. "This is exceptional work," Marcus said, paging through the documentation. "The level of detail the village updates alone are worth the extra time, never mind the springs and fords and shelters. The council is going to be very pleased." "I'll need to return for follow-up surveys," Phillip said. "Seasonal variations, weather pattern documentation, potentially some additional village consultations." Of course. We'll draw up an extended commission." "How long do you anticipate the full project taking?" Phillip glanced at Wren, who smiled slightly. "At least 2 more trips, probably 3. 6 months to a year of total field work spaced across seasons. And you'll need the same escort." Marcus looked between them with knowing eyes. "Wren Fairwind is essential to the project," Phillip said firmly. "No one else has her knowledge of the territory or her relationships with the local communities. I'll make sure the escort assignment is written into the extended commission." Marcus made notes on a form. "Check back in 2 days. I'll have the paperwork ready." They left the office and stood in the dusty street of Redwater Crossing, the checkpoint that was supposed to be the end of their journey. 2 days, Phillip said. 2 days, Wren agreed. "And then you'll go back to human lands, submit your maps, and prepare for the next survey." "And you'll go back to where exactly?" "Honestly, I was thinking I might go visit my mother. I have not seen her in months, and she would love to hear about this journey." Wren smiled. "Also, she will be completely insufferable when I tell her about you, and I would rather get that over with sooner than later." "She'll disapprove." "She'll be delighted. Insufferably delighted. She has been telling me for years that I work too much and don't let anyone get close." Wren reached for his hand. "She'll like you, though. She values people who take their responsibilities seriously but don't take themselves too seriously. I can work with that." Phillip squeezed her hand. "When do we leave for Windridge?" Wren's expression shifted to surprise. "We." "You don't think I'm letting you disappear for months while I'm stuck back in human lands, do you? I have 2 days before the paperwork is ready. That's enough time to visit your mother, yes. It's a 3-day journey to Windridge from here. Then we had better start walking." Phillip grinned. "Unless you're tired of my company already." "Never," Wren said, and kissed him right there in the street of Redwater Crossing, not caring who saw. Windridge was smaller than Greenhollow or Riverside, a cluster of perhaps a dozen buildings nestled into the side of a hill with a view over a broad valley. Wren's mother, Iris Fairwind, was a small, spare woman with silver threading her dark hair and eyes the same amber as her daughter's. She took one look at Phillip and Wren standing together on her doorstep, and her face split into a grin. "So," she said, "this is why your last 3 letters have been full of cartography talk and completely devoid of your usual complaints about boring escort duties." "Mother," Wren said, with the particular exasperation of an adult child who loves their parent dearly and also wishes they were slightly less perceptive. "Phillip Kensington, madam," Phillip said, offering a bow. "It's an honor to meet you." "Oh, he's polite," Iris said to Wren. "Did you train him, or did he come that way?" "He came that way, unfortunately. I can't take credit." Wren stepped inside, pulling Phillip after her. "Can we stay for a few days? We have to be back at Redwater Crossing in 4 days for paperwork, but I wanted you to meet him." "Of course you can stay. I'll make up the guest room." Iris looked between them with sharp, knowing eyes. "Or should I make up 2 guest rooms?" "Mother, it's a reasonable question. You are both adults, and I have not gone blind or stupid in my old age." Phillip felt his face heat, but Wren just sighed. "1 room is fine, thank you, good. I like him already. Anyone who makes you blush like that is doing something right." Iris turned toward the kitchen. "Come, sit. I'll make tea and you can tell me everything." The next 2 days passed in a warm blur of family hospitality. Iris wanted to hear every detail of the journey, and Wren recounted it with humor and affection. highlighting the places they had visited and the work Phillip had done. Phillip, in turn, found himself talking about his uncle, about the maps, about the future surveys he was planning. "You're good for her," Iris said to him on the second evening, when Wren had gone to the village commons to visit old friends. They sat on the small porch of her house, watching the sun set over the valley. "She's always been so focused on being strong, being capable, being the one who helps everyone else. But she needs someone who sees past all that to the person underneath, someone who makes her feel safe enough to relax." "She makes me feel the same way," Phillip said, "like I can trust myself again, like I don't have to carry everything alone." "Then you're good for each other, that's what matters." Iris sipped her tea. "What will you do when the surveys are finished? Keep coming back?" "I hope so. I'm planning to propose a permanent position Joint Trade Council cartographer specializing in Orc lands, with Wren as my official guide and partner." He had not said this out loud before, but the idea had been forming for days. There's so much territory that needs accurate mapping, so much knowledge that needs to be recorded and shared. It could be years of work. And when those years are done, then I hope she'll let me stay anyway. Phillip looked at Iris directly. "I love your daughter, madam." "I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other a few weeks, but I can't imagine my life without her in it now." Iris smiled. "Then I suggest you tell her that, and soon, before she convinces herself this is just a temporary thing." When Wren returned, Phillip asked her to walk with him, and they climbed the hill behind the village to a spot where the valley spread below them in the gathering darkness, lights beginning to glow in windows. "My mother likes you," Wren said. "She told me you have good energy, which is her highest compliment. I like her too. I can see where you get your directness." Phillip took Wren's hand, his heart hammering. "I need to tell you something." "That sounds ominous." "It's not. At least, I hope it's not." He turned to face her fully. "I'm planning to propose to the Joint Trade Council that they create a permanent cartographer position for Orc lands. Years of work, regular surveys, continuous updating of the maps, and I want you as my partner in that. Not just as a guide, but as a true partner, your name on the maps alongside mine, joint decisions, shared credit." Wren's eyes widened. "You want me to be a cartographer? I want you to be my partner, in work and in everything else if you'll have me." The words tumbled out faster now. "I know it's soon. I know we've only known each other a few weeks, but Wren, I love you. I love working with you, I love learning from you, I love who I am when I'm with you. And I don't want this to end when the surveys are done. I want to keep doing this. Keep mapping the world together. Keep building something together." For a long, heart-stopping moment, Wren just stared at him. Then she laughed, bright and joyful, and threw her arms around his neck. "Yes," she said. "Yes to all of it, the partnership, the surveys, the everything else. Because I love you too, you wonderful, careful, brilliant man. I have loved you since the sheltered valley, maybe before. And I have been terrified that this would end, that you would go back to your world and I would go back to mine, and we would just have these few weeks to remember." "Not just a few weeks," Phillip promised, holding her close. "Years. A lifetime if you want it." "I want it," Wren said, and kissed him as the stars came out above Windridge. They returned to Redwater Crossing to find that Marcus had the extended commission paperwork ready and more. The Joint Trade Council, impressed by the preliminary maps and documentation, had approved a multi-year surveying project with generous funding and a provision for partnered work. "They want comprehensive maps of all Orc lands accessible through the trade agreements," Marcus explained. "Springs, shelters, villages, resources, seasonal variations, everything. They've allocated budget for a minimum of 3 years, with potential extensions. And they've specifically requested that Wren Fairwind be assigned as the primary guide and partner, given her demonstrated expertise. Phillip and Wren exchanged glances, barely suppressed grins. "We accept," Phillip said. "Obviously," Wren added. Marcus pushed across a stack of contracts. "Sign these and you're officially employed." Joint Trade Council Surveying Team for Orc Territories, Phillip Kensington and Wren Fairwind, co-cartographers. They signed, and with those signatures, transformed their 3-week detour into the foundation of a future. The first year of surveying took them across the breadth of Orc lands, from the southern forests to the northern hills, mapping and documenting and building relationships with communities who had never seen their lands represented accurately before. They worked through summer heat and autumn rain, through the first snows of winter and the muddy thaw of spring. They mapped routes and resources, villages and viewpoints, safe paths and dangerous ones. They worked as true partners, making decisions together, checking each other's measurements, combining Wren's intimate knowledge of the land with Phillip's technical expertise. The maps they created were like nothing that had come before, detailed, accurate, marked with notes about seasonal variations and local knowledge, annotated with the names of the villages that had shared information and the guides who had helped. At the end of that first year, they submitted their work to the Joint Trade Council and received commendations for excellence. Traders began using the new maps and reported significantly safer, faster journeys. Villages started appearing on human trade routes for the first time, bringing new economic opportunities. The fear and mistrust that had characterized human-orc interactions for generations began, slowly, to ease. "We're making a difference," Wren said one evening as they camped in a familiar spot the spring where they had spent their first night together, a full year ago. "We are," Phillip agreed. "Your idea worked. The maps are changing things. Our idea. You're the one who makes the maps real, who gives them authority and precision." She leaned against him, comfortable and easy. "We make a good team, the best team." They married in the spring of the second year, in a quiet ceremony in Windridge with Iris beaming, and a handful of friends from the villages they had surveyed in attendance. The ceremony blended human and orc traditions, Phillip's vows in the human style, formal and romantic, and Wren's in the orc style, practical and fierce, a promise of partnership and shared strength. "I vow to stand beside you in all things," Wren said, her hands clasped in his. "To share the burdens and the joys, to walk the trails and map the world, to build a life with you that honors both our peoples and creates something new. You are my partner, my love, my home. I vow to trust your judgment and share my own," Phillip said. "To learn from you and teach what I know, to value the work we do and the life we make, to love you in all seasons and all weathers. You are my compass, my heart, my future." They settled, as much as their work allowed settling, in a small house on the border between human and orc lands, a place where they could access both communities easily. It became a landmark in its own right, the cartographer's house, where travelers could stop for accurate maps and current information, where guides came for training, where the work of building understanding continued. In the third year, Wren discovered she was pregnant, and they both approached the news with a mixture of joy and trepidation. "A child in our life," Wren said, her hand on her still flat belly. "This will change everything." "It will," Phillip agreed, "but we'll adapt, we always do." They adapted by bringing Iris to live with them, to help with the baby and the house while they continued their work. They adapted by taking shorter surveying trips, staying closer to home. They adapted by training other guides and cartographers, building a team that could continue the work even when they needed to step back. Their son was born in early autumn, small and perfect, with Philip's dark hair and Wren's amber eyes. They named him Liam, and he became the center of their world even as the maps and surveys and work continued around him. "He's going to grow up between worlds," Wren said, rocking Liam while Philip worked on updating a map at the table. "Human and orc, both and neither. He's going to grow up with parents who love each other and love him," Philip countered. "And he's going to understand that the world is bigger and more complex than any simple division between peoples. That seems like a good way to grow up." Liam did grow up that way, toddling around the cartographer's house while his parents worked, playing with children from both human and orc communities, learning to read maps before he could fully read words. He grew up knowing that his mother was orc and his father was human, and that this was simply a fact, neither strange nor shameful, just the truth of his family. When Liam was 2, Wren became pregnant again, and their second son, Alden, arrived with less fanfare but equal love. Alden was quieter than Liam, more thoughtful, with a tendency to stare intently at everything as though memorizing the world. "Future cartographer," Philip said, watching Alden examine a beetle with grave concentration. "Future something," Wren agreed, "but whatever he becomes, he'll be loved." The years unfolded in a pattern of work and family, surveys and homecomings, maps made and children raised. The Joint Trade Council renewed their commission again and again, recognizing the value of what they had built. The maps expanded, became more detailed, more comprehensive. Trade flourished, understanding grew, and slowly, carefully, the rigid boundaries between human and orc lands became more permeable. Philip's hair began to gray at the temples. Wren's face gained new lines at the corners of her eyes from years of squinting at horizons. Liam and Alden grew tall and capable. Liam drawn to the work of guiding like his mother, Alden fascinated by the technical precision of cartography like his father. "We made this," Wren said one evening, surveying the house full of maps and books and the sounds of their sons arguing amiably about the best route to somewhere. "This whole life, this whole new possibility." "You made it," Philip said. "By volunteering for an escort assignment and then deliberately extending it by 3 weeks. We made it together, by deciding that 3 weeks was worth having, even if it broke the schedule." She leaned against him, still fitting perfectly after all these years. "Best decision I ever made." "Second best," Philip corrected. "The best was saying yes when I asked you to be my partner." "True." Wren smiled. "Though I think they're really the same decision, just stretched across time. The decision to choose this, choose us, choose the life we could build together." And that, Philip thought, was exactly right. The journey from that first border checkpoint to this moment, this house, this family, this life had been long and winding, full of detours and delays and routes that took far longer than originally planned. But every extra day, every extended survey, every deliberate choice to take the scenic route had led them here, to something far better than anything he could have imagined at the start. The maps they had made would outlive them, helping travelers for generations. But the real legacy, the one that mattered most, was sitting at the table arguing about trails, and standing beside him watching the sunset, and sleeping peacefully in beds down the hall. The legacy was the life they had built, the bridge they had become between worlds, the proof that partnership across all boundaries was not just possible but beautiful. Years later, when Philip's hair had gone fully silver and Wren's moved slower but still sure, they took one last surveying trip together. Just the two of them, revisiting the routes of that first journey, checking their maps against the reality of the land. They stood at the spring where they had spent their first night, the one Wren had extended the journey to show him, and looked at how little had changed. The water still flowed clear and cold. The stone basin still caught the overflow. The fire pit still sat ready for travelers. You regret it? Wren asked, not the forbidden question about their life together, but something softer. All the traveling, the work, the years on the road, not for a second, Phillip said. This work mattered, these maps mattered, you matter. He took her hand, their fingers interlacing with the ease of decades. I would do it all again, exactly the same way. Every detour, every extended route, every extra week. Even the 3 weeks that this journey was supposed to take 5 days. Wren's eyes glinted with humor. Especially those 3 weeks. They gave me everything that came after. Phillip pulled her close, and she came willingly, fitting against him as perfectly as she had that first night in the sheltered valley. They gave me you. They stood there as the sun set. 2 people who had chosen each other across every boundary and built a life of shared purpose and deep love. And the land they had spent decades mapping stretched around them like a blessing. Every route and river and hidden spring a testament to the truth that the best journeys are never the shortest ones, and the finest destinations are the ones you build together, one deliberate step at a time.